A magnificent city thrives in the heart of a waterless desert. This is the central paradox of history. Some of humanity's greatest urban achievements did not rise on fertile riverbanks, but in places that seem to defy all logic for survival. Think of Petra carved into rose-red cliffs, or Machu Picchu perched among Andean clouds. These were not accidents of geography. They were acts of deliberate, breathtaking engineering. By the end of this journey, you will understand the single, ingenious secret that made every one of these impossible cities possible. How did societies without modern tools master the arid lands and mountain peaks? And what hidden systems lie beneath the ruins we admire today? What does it truly take to build a civilization where life seems unthinkable? The impossible city is defined by what it lacks. It is not simply a remote town or a difficult climb. It is a place where the fundamental ingredients for life appear completely absent. Picture the vast, shimmering heat of a desert with no visible river for hundreds of miles, or a mountaintop so sheer that rain seems to slide right off it and into the valleys below. These are the landscapes of scarcity. For thousands of years, the great cradles of civilization blossomed in the opposite conditions. The Nile Valley, with its predictable, life-giving floods, deposited rich black silt that fed empires. The lands between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers earned the name the Fertile Crescent for a reason. Water was abundant, the soil was generous, and cities grew almost as naturally as the crops. So why would anyone choose the hard path? Why build your grandest project where every single drop of water must be fought for, captured, and defended? The answer lies in the power of that very choice. These were not settlements of last resort. They were deliberate statements of control, of security, and of profound technological confidence. The impossible location was often selected for strategic reasons, a natural fortress or a hub of trade routes, but its viability hinged on solving one equation. A thriving urban population, which could number in the tens of thousands, required a massive, constant, and reliable supply of water, not just for drinking, but for bathing, for sanitation, for industry, and for the spiritual ceremonies that bound the community together. In a fertile river valley, this water flows to you. In an impossible city, you must perform a miracle. You must make the water come to you, or you must journey to it and bring it back every single day for generations. Therefore, the water system was never just another piece of infrastructure. It was the city's beating heart, its hidden soul, and the single most critical invention that allowed stone to rise where only dust and rock existed before. The first act of defiance was not to move the city, but to move the water. Before a single stone could be laid for a temple or a home, ancient engineers had to perform a kind of alchemy, transforming the sparse offerings of their harsh environment into a reliable resource. This was the mastery of capture, a silent, patient art of listening to the land and intercepting every possible drop. In a landscape that appeared bone dry to the casual observer, they learned to see water everywhere. They became experts in the subtle language of their environment, tracking the paths of infrequent rains, the behavior of mountain mist, and the secret whispers of underground reservoirs. Their primary target was rainfall, but not as we might think of it. In many arid regions, rain does not fall in gentle, soaking showers. It arrives in violent, sudden bursts that flash across the hard ground, gathering into torrents that vanish almost as quickly as they appear, lost to evaporation or deep, unreachable fissures. The challenge was to catch this fleeting bounty before it could escape. The solution was the catchment system, a vast, engineered landscape designed to do one thing: guide water toward a point of collection. On a grand scale, this meant sculpting entire hillsides. Workers would clear rocks and vegetation to create smooth, sloping surfaces of packed earth or stone, sometimes covering acres. These artificial watersheds acted like giant funnels. When the rare storm hit, instead of scattering wildly, the runoff was channeled into a single, purposeful flow, directed into waiting reservoirs or deep cisterns carved into the bedrock below. But what if even rain was too scarce? Ingenuity turned to even more elusive sources. In coastal deserts or high mountains, where rain might fail but fog rolls in with reliable thickness, cultures developed fog catchers. The concept is beautifully simple. They would erect fences or walls of loosely woven reeds or set out piles of stones. As the moist fog passed through, countless tiny droplets would condense on the surfaces, coalesce, and drip down into collection channels. It was a way of harvesting the very air. Similarly, the creation of dew ponds on high plateaus demonstrated a deep understanding of microclimates. These were not simply holes in the ground. They were carefully lined, often with clay and straw, and strategically placed in dips where cooler night air would cause moisture to condense, slowly filling the basin from atmospheric humidity itself. The most critical form of capture, however, was invisible. It was the discovery and exploitation of hidden aquifers, those vast underground lakes trapped in porous rock. Settlements were often positioned at the precise point where this secret water touched the surface, at a natural spring or seep. When the spring was not enough, they went down to meet it, digging astonishingly deep wells or constructing elaborate stepwells that allowed entire communities to descend to the water table. The placement of a city was never arbitrary. It was a calculated decision based on this hydrological intelligence, a choice to build directly over the landscape's hidden veins. This was the foundational gamble of every impossible city, a bet that human cleverness could outwit geographical scarcity by mastering the art of the intercept. Yet capturing the water was only half the battle. Once you had it, you faced an even more difficult task: how to move this precious cargo across miles of treacherous terrain without losing a single drop. The captured water now had to travel. In a world without pumps or pressurized pipes, the only force powerful enough to move a river across a mountain was the most fundamental one of all: gravity. Ancient engineers became masters of this simple, relentless power, designing systems where water did all the work itself, flowing obediently from source to city. This was the era of gravity's architects, and their blueprints were written directly onto the landscape. The principle was elegantly straightforward: water always seeks the lowest point. To guide it across miles of rugged terrain, they had to create a path that sloped ever so slightly downward from the source spring all the way to the final reservoir in the city center. The genius was in the execution. A slope too steep would cause the water to rush violently, eroding channels and arriving in a destructive torrent. A slope too shallow, and the water would simply stop, pooling uselessly along the route. The ideal gradient was often a drop of mere inches for every 100 feet of distance, a line so gentle it appears almost level to the naked eye. Creating this perfect, imperceptible decline across canyons and hills required an astonishing feat of surveying. Without lasers or transits, engineers relied on simple, brilliant tools. One common method used a long, water-filled trench or a series of interconnected parts. By sighting along the surface of the still water, they could establish a true level line across great distances. Another technique involved a chorobate, a long wooden frame with a central groove that held water, acting as a giant spirit level. Teams would work in relays, painstakingly marking the desired descent step by step, sometimes over decades, until the entire route was mapped. This was more than ditch digging. It was a form of landscape surgery. To maintain that critical gradient, they would carve channels directly into cliff faces, build elevated stone aqueducts across valleys, and tunnels straight through the hearts of mountains. The 3,000-year-old Aqueduct of Jericho, for instance, is a testament to this persistence. a tunnel dug through solid rock for over a mile to bring spring water to the desert oasis. In the Andes, the Inca engineered canals that ran for dozens of miles along precipitous slopes, their stone linings so precise they still hold water today. Every bend, every dip, every junction in these systems was a calculated decision, a masterpiece of applied physics conceived centuries before the science was formally understood. The water system was the city's first and most vital monument, a hidden sculpture of function that turned the force that pulls everything down into the very thing that made life rise up. But the story of moving water is not owned by a single civilization. While Roman aqueducts stand as iconic stone arches against the sky, they represent just one brilliant answer to a universal challenge. Across the globe, in deserts and mountains far from the Mediterranean, ancient engineers devised their own astonishing solutions, each perfectly adapted to their unique environment. They prove that the aqueduct is not merely a Roman invention, but a human one, reinvented wherever necessity demanded it. In the vast, sun-scorched plateaus of ancient Persia, the greatest threat was not distance but evaporation. Carrying water in open channels under that relentless sun would see it vanish into the air before reaching its destination. Their ingenious response was to hide the entire river underground. They created the Qanat, a marvel of subterranean engineering. Teams of workers would first locate a water-bearing aquifer at the foot of a mountain. Then they would begin digging a gently sloping tunnel backward, away from the fertile plain and into the heart of the dry earth. Vertical access shafts were dug every 100 feet or so, not only for removing excavated material but also for providing air and maintenance points. Over generations, these tunnels could stretch for 40, even 50 miles, all while maintaining that crucial, gravity-fed slope. The Qanat was a self-regulating system, delivering a cool, constant flow of water that was protected from the desert heat and from potential contamination or sabotage. It was a river turned inside out, a secret lifeline flowing in perpetual darkness to feed fountains, gardens, and cities in the world above. Far to the west, in the high Andes, the Inca faced a different set of obstacles: sheer cliffs, seismic tremors, and torrential rains. Their solution was one of breathtaking precision and resilience. They built aqueducts of fitted stone that clung to the sides of mountains, often at dizzying heights. These were not just functional ditches, they were works of art with channels carefully lined to prevent leakage and erosion. The Inca understood their unstable geology, so their structures were designed to flex and settle without cracking, a technique modern engineers still study. Some of their canals served a dual purpose, feeding terraced agricultural fields on their journey downslope, turning entire mountainsides into cascading gardens. Their water systems were woven into the sacred landscape, often beginning at revered mountain springs, blending practical nourishment with spiritual meaning. Even earlier, in the sophisticated cities of the Indus Valley, like Mohenjo-Daro, we find a different philosophy altogether, one of urban concealment and public health. Here, around 4,000 years ago, builders employed an extensive network of standardized kiln-fired ceramic pipes. These pipes were laid beneath the streets and within the walls of homes, creating an early form of indoor plumbing and city-wide drainage. The system was carefully planned with slopes and inspection points, demonstrating an advanced concern for sanitation and communal well-being that would not be seen again for millennia. Each of these systems, the hidden Qanat, the clinging stone canal, and the buried ceramic network, tells the same profound story. It is a story of observing a problem with clear eyes and using available materials and deep environmental wisdom to craft a solution that was not just effective, but sustainable for centuries. They moved water not by copying a foreign blueprint, but by listening intently to the specific whispers of their own land. And once this life-giving flow finally arrived at the city gates, an entirely new challenge began: how to store a fleeting resource for the long, dry seasons ahead. A river can flow in complete silence, hidden from the sun and the wind. This was the Persian solution to an impossible landscape, a technology so elegant it transformed the desert's greatest weakness into its ultimate strength. The Qanat did not fight the arid environment. It collaborated with it, creating a sustainable lifeline that could last for 1,000 years. The process began with a profound understanding of hidden geography. Skilled surveyors, known as muqannis, would seek out the alluvial fans at the base of mountain ranges, where gravel and sand acted as a natural sponge, trapping rainwater and snowmelt from the peaks. This was the secret reservoir. From this point, they began the monumental task of reverse engineering a river. Instead of digging from the city outward, they started at the intended outlet in the fertile plain and dug a tunnel backward into the dry foothills, aiming precisely for that water-laden aquifer. The tunnel's slope was the system's genius, a gradient so gentle it allowed water to seep into the channel and flow steadily toward the plain without any need for pumps, using only gravity's patient pull. But how do you dig and maintain a tunnel that stretches for 30, 40, or even 50 miles? The answer was the series of vertical shafts, dug from the surface straight down to the tunnel level at intervals of about 100 feet. These shafts served as air vents, provided access for the removal of excavated material, and allowed generations of maintainers to descend and clear blockages of silt or debris. From the air, a Qanat system looks like a line of craters marching across the desert, a dotted line pointing from green fields to a distant mountain, a map of human intention written upon the earth. The benefits were transformative. Because the water traveled underground, it was shielded from the evaporating heat of the desert sun, a loss that could claim over 90% of an open canal's flow. It arrived cool and clean, filtered by its journey through the earth. A single Qanat could turn a parched valley into a blooming oasis, supporting not just drinking water, but orchards, vineyards, and lush gardens. This was the hidden infrastructure that made grandeur possible. The majestic city of Persepolis, with its towering columns and vast palaces, did not rise in spite of the desert, but because of it. Its splendor was fed by a network of Qanats tapping distant aquifers, a civilization literally rooted in the mastery of invisible water. The system was democratic, too, with water shares carefully allocated by time, ensuring entire communities thrived from a single, shared source. The Qanat was more than plumbing. It was a social contract, a geological artwork, and a testament to the power of working with the constraints of a place, rather than simply struggling against them. Yet even the most brilliant hidden river must eventually reach the surface, and there, in the open air, it faced its greatest trial. For the Nabateans of Petra, water was not a quiet secret to be gently coaxed from the earth. It was a roaring, unpredictable force of nature that arrived with terrifying power. Their city, carved into the rose-red cliffs of a desert canyon, sat directly in the path of its own destruction. The very wadis, or dry riverbeds, that defined Petra's majestic landscape were its greatest threat. For most of the year, these canyons were silent and parched, but when the rare, violent rainstorms struck the surrounding highlands, they transformed in minutes into churning walls of water, mud, and rock, flash floods capable of scouring the city from the map. The Nabateans did not see this as a problem to avoid, but as an opportunity to master. Their entire civilization was built on a radical idea. They would not just capture this water, they would domesticate the flood itself. This began with a profound act of hydrological redirection. Before a single temple facade was carved, they reshaped the very bones of the canyon. At the narrow, upper entrance to the Sikh, the breathtaking gorge that serves as Petra's main corridor, they constructed a massive diversion dam. This dam was not meant to create a lake, but to perform a critical piece of surgery on the landscape. When a flash flood surged toward the city, The dam would intercept the main force of the water and shunt it away from the vulnerable sick, sending it through a specially carved tunnel into an alternate, harmless wadi. The water destined for Petra was then metered, allowed to enter the sick in a controlled, manageable flow through a sophisticated channel system carved into the canyon walls. They turned a potential disaster into a regulated delivery system. Once inside the city, every surface became a tool for collection. The Nabateans engineered Petra to function like a giant catchment basin. They paved courtyards and smoothed bedrock surfaces to create runoff plains. They carved intricate networks of channels and pipes into cliffs, along streets, and across facades, all sloping toward a vast array of underground cisterns. These were not simple holes, they were monumental feats of storage, carved deep into the solid rock, plastered to be watertight, and some large enough to hold over 1 million gallons. Every drop that fell on Petra, from a rare direct rain shower to the managed flow from the diverted floods, was guided, captured, and saved. It was a closed loop of survival in an open desert. This mastery of flash flood hydrology did more than just prevent catastrophe, it fueled an empire. By controlling water, the Nabateans controlled the trade routes of the ancient world. Petra sat at the crossroads of incense, silk, and spice caravans. A merchant arriving after months in the desert did not just find a safe haven, he found a miracle, a city with public fountains, lush gardens, and even swimming pools. The ability to offer reliable water to thousands of people and their animals was an irresistible economic and political power. It transformed a strategic stopover into a magnificent capital, supporting a population that historians estimate could have reached 30,000 at its peak. The soaring treasury and the vast monastery were not just symbols of wealth, they were the ultimate proof of a civilization that had solved the desert's cruelest equation. They built a hydropolis, a city of water, by learning to dance with the flood. High on a ridge between two Andean peaks, Machu Picchu seems to float above the clouds, a place of stone suspended in thin air. Its very location poses the ultimate water challenge, a city built on a steep mountain slope where rain can fall in torrents, yet flat ground for collecting it is non-existent. The Inca solution was not to conquer this terrain, but to choreograph a perfect gravity-fed ballet of water across it, a system so integrated with the mountain it feels less like engineering and more like natural law. It all began with a primary spring located on the steep hillside north of the city, carefully hidden and protected. This was not an accidental water source, it was a calculated choice. By situating the spring at an elevation higher than the entire urban complex, the Inca guaranteed that every single drop of water would arrive in the city with the gentle, persistent push of gravity. They did not need to lift or pump a thing. From this sacred source, the water entered a masterstroke of hydraulic planning, a meticulously constructed stone channel. This channel did not take the shortest path. Instead, it traced a long, deliberate route along the contours of the mountain, maintaining a steady, shallow gradient to control the flow's speed and pressure. It was the city's lifeline, and it was treated with reverence. The channel was covered with stone slabs to protect the water from debris and evaporation, a hidden artery bringing life into the heart of the citadel. Where this main channel entered the urban sector, the true elegance of the system revealed itself. The Inca designed a sequential series of 16 ceremonial fountains, often called the Stairway of Fountains. These were not merely decorative, they were practical public distribution points, each one a small work of art carved from solid stone. The water would flow into the first fountain, filling it to a precise level before spilling over a carved lip into a channel that led to the next fountain down the staircase. This created a cascading chain of fresh water, accessible to different sectors of the city. The highest fountains served the Temple of the Sun and the royal enclosures, emphasizing the spiritual and social importance of pure water. As it descended, the water reached the residential and agricultural terraces, ensuring the entire community was served by this single, managed source. But bringing water in was only half the equation. On a slope as precipitous as Machu Picchu, uncontrolled water is a destructive force. The Inca understood that for the city to endure, every drop that arrived, plus every drop of rain that fell directly on it, needed an orderly exit. This is where their genius for integration shines brightest. Beneath the stone paving of every plaza, under the foundations of every building, they constructed a deep layer of crushed rock. This acted as a subterranean drainage mattress, allowing rainwater to percolate down quickly. The entire city was built on a foundation of rubble, a hidden sponge that prevented saturation and collapse. From there, an extensive network of drainage channels, often incorporated into staircases and building walls, caught the water and directed it through carefully placed outlets. These outlets channeled the runoff into the agricultural terraces below, where it could irrigate crops before finally being released into the steep jungles of the mountainside. There were no sewers mixing waste with this precious spring water. The systems were kept separate in a stunningly advanced concept of sanitation. Every element, from the covered spring to the final drainage outlet, was designed to work in concert with the extreme topography. The water system did not fight the mountain. It used the mountain's own shape and force to achieve perfect balance. Machu Picchu stands today not in spite of the rain and slope, but because of them, a testament to a civilization that saw water not as an obstacle, but as a partner to be guided in a silent, eternal dance. Beneath the sun-baked plains of Cappadocia lies a world turned inside out. While other civilizations built monuments reaching for the sky, the people here performed a different kind of miracle. They dug down, creating vast, labyrinthine cities that descended 10, even 12 stories into the soft volcanic rock. These were not temporary shelters, but permanent, self-contained habitats where thousands could live, work, and worship, completely hidden from the world above. This choice presented the ultimate water paradox. How do you sustain a subterranean metropolis when every natural source of water exists on the surface, exposed to sun, raiders, and drought? The answer was a vertical quest for a hidden sea. The deepest secret of these underground cities was not their tunnels or their hidden chapels, but their astonishing wells. Engineers and laborers would begin the perilous work of digging straight down from the lowest levels of the city, through layer after layer of tough rock. This was a monumental task performed with simple hand tools, a slow, deliberate descent into darkness that could plunge hundreds of feet. Their goal was to reach the water table, that invisible plane where the porous rock below is fully saturated with groundwater. Striking this hidden reservoir was the difference between a fortress and a tomb. When they finally pierced the aquifer, the well became the city's beating heart, a protected lifeline drawing from a source that surface enemies could neither poison nor cut off. But a deep, stagnant well in a confined space presents its own deadly dangers, foul air, and the risk of contamination. The solution showcased a profound understanding of underground physics, the ventilation shaft. These were not simple holes, they were carefully engineered chimneys, often dug in tandem with the wells, that created a constant, passive flow of fresh air. As warmer air from the inhabited chambers rose and escaped through these shafts, it drew cooler, fresh air down from cleverly concealed surface openings, creating a natural circulation that prevented the air around the water from becoming toxic or stale. This circulation was vital. It kept the water supply fresh and breathable for the communities that depended on it. The protected nature of this water source was its greatest strength. While surface cisterns could be targeted in a siege or evaporate under the Anatolian sun, the groundwater deep below remained constant in temperature and volume, shielded by the earth itself. Access was tightly controlled through narrow, defensible passages, often requiring a descent through multiple guarded gates. This water did more than quench thirst, it enabled a truly subterranean life. It allowed for kitchens, for sanitation, for the cultivation of certain plants in designated areas, and for the spiritual rituals that maintained community cohesion during long periods of confinement. The underground cities of Cappadocia stand as a testament to a different kind of hydrological genius, one defined not by moving water across a landscape, but by descending to meet it on its own terms, creating a sealed, sustainable world where the greatest treasure was not gold, but the dark, cool silence of a perfect well. The captured water now had to wait. For civilizations built in impossible places, the arrival of water was often a seasonal event, a brief, glorious bounty followed by months of silence. A sophisticated system of channels and aqueducts was meaningless if the water it carried vanished into the sand the moment it stopped flowing. Survival through the dry season, or worse, through years of drought, demanded a different kind of genius, the art of storage. This was the creation of artificial time capsules for water, a way to stretch a moment of plenty across the entire calendar. The technology of the cistern and reservoir became the final, crucial link in the chain, turning a temporary resource into a permanent foundation. The methods varied as widely as the landscapes themselves, each a perfect adaptation to local materials and threats. In the sophisticated grid of Mohenjo-Daro in the Indus Valley, we find one of the earliest and most striking examples of public water storage, the Great Bath. This was not a natural pond but a monumental brick-lined tank, sealed with a layer of bitumen to make it watertight. Its size and central location suggest it was far more than a swimming pool. It was a civic reservoir, likely used for ceremonial purification and possibly as an emergency water supply, demonstrating that water security was woven into the city's spiritual and social core from its very conception. In the deserts of Petra and Cappadocia, the solution was to go deep. Here, engineers carved vast, bell-shaped cisterns directly into the solid bedrock beneath the city. These were not mere holes, they were cavernous spaces, some capable of holding over 1 million gallons. Their subterranean location was strategic. It kept the water cool and, most importantly, protected it from the relentless evaporative power of the desert sun. A surface reservoir in such a climate could lose 90% of its volume to the air in a single season, but a sealed, underground cistern preserved almost every precious drop. The engineering of these chambers was meticulous. Walls were smoothed and then coated with multiple layers of hydraulic plaster, a special lime-based mixture that could set even underwater, creating an impermeable seal. Covers, often made of stone slabs, were fitted over the access points to further reduce evaporation and prevent contamination from debris or animals. But storing water was only half the battle. Keeping it clean was equally vital for a dense urban population. This led to another subtle innovation, the settlement tank. Before water entered a main storage cistern, it would often be channeled into a preliminary, smaller tank. Here, the flow would slow, allowing heavier particles of silt and sediment to settle to the bottom. The clearer water from the top would then be carefully drawn off into the main reservoir. This simple, gravity-based process provided a basic form of purification, ensuring the stored water remained potable for months. Whether it was the open, ceremonial bath of Mohenjo-Daro, the hidden cisterns of desert kingdoms, or the plaster-lined tanks of Mediterranean empires, each storage solution answered the same urgent question: how do you make a fleeting resource permanent? They transformed water from an event into an asset, a buried treasure that guaranteed a city could endure the long, dry silence and emerge once again to thrive. But a city can also drown in its own abundance. In the tropical lowlands of Southeast Asia, the builders of Angkor faced the opposite extreme of the desert's scarcity. Here, the challenge was not a lack of water, but its overwhelming cyclical tyranny. The monsoon climate delivered a brutal rhythm of extremes, months of relentless, drowning deluge followed by a long, parching drought where rivers shrank to muddy threads. To build a city here, let alone an empire, required not just capturing water, but taming an entire seasonal cycle. The Khmer engineers looked at this volatile landscape and saw an opportunity for total hydraulic control. Their solution was to re-engineer the Earth itself on a staggering, almost unimaginable scale. They transformed the plain into a massive, managed watershed, a machine for living woven from water and soil. At the heart of this system were the baray, immense rectangular reservoirs that defy logic even today. The largest, the West Baray, stretches 5 miles long and over a mile wide, an artificial inland sea bounded by earthen dikes towering over the plain. To create it, thousands of workers moved millions of cubic yards of earth, not with machinery, but with baskets and sheer human determination. This was not a passive pond, it was a strategic battery charged during the monsoon rains. A complex network of canals, some reaching dozens of miles, funneled water from the Siem Reap River and its tributaries into these vast basins, capturing the floodwaters that would otherwise have washed the topsoil away. The genius lay in the release. Throughout the dry season, a carefully managed system of gates and channels allowed this stored water to be methodically distributed back across the landscape. It fed a sprawling grid of smaller canals and field channels, irrigating rice paddies that could now support multiple harvests per year, turning seasonal scarcity into year-round abundance. But the system's function went even deeper, literally. By saturating the area with these massive reservoirs, the Khmer engineers artificially raised and stabilized the entire region's water table. This meant that even during the deepest drought, wells and soil moisture remained reliable, a buffer against famine that supported a population historians estimate may have approached 1 million people. The water network did more than feed bodies, it shaped the spiritual and political landscape. The baray were not just tanks, they were symbolic oceans, representing the Hindu cosmic sea from which life emerges. At the center of the largest ones, islands were built, crowned with temples like the West Mebane, which once held a magnificent bronze statue of the god Vishnu reclining on the cosmic waters. The city's crowning monument, Angkor Wat itself, is surrounded by a vast moat that is itself a perfectly square miniature baray, a reflection of the universe in microcosm. The canals became highways for transport, for trade, and for the movement of the enormous stone blocks used to build the temples. Angkor was a hydraulic city in the most profound sense, a metropolis where water was the central organizing principle of economy, religion, and power. It demonstrated that the mastery of impossible places was not just about finding water, but about mastering its time, storing the flood to breathe life into the drought, and in doing so, building one of the greatest pre-industrial urban complexes the world has ever seen. The same principle of hydrological choice shaped a world of stone and sky in the American Southwest. High on the Colorado Plateau, the ancestral Pueblones did not simply settle on the arid mesas, they built entire cities within the cliffs themselves. The breathtaking cliff dwellings of places like Mesa Verde were not just architectural marvels, they were precise solutions to a water equation written in sandstone. In this landscape of deep canyons and flat tablelands, surface water was a fleeting illusion. Rivers were distant, and rainfall was sporadic, often arriving in sudden summer thunderstorms that vanished into the porous rock. To survive here for centuries, these communities became masters of a vertical water hunt, learning to read the cliff faces like a map to hidden treasure. Their primary sources were seeps and springs, places where the sandstone layers, acting like a natural filter, would slowly release trapped rainwater or snowmelt. These weren't gushing fountains, but persistent, delicate drips emerging from specific geological strata. A settlement was often positioned directly adjacent to such a seep, with the architecture literally built around the water source. You can see this in the careful placement of rooms and storage areas, designed to protect and maximize access to these vital, weeping walls. But a slow seep could not support an entire village alone. The ancestral Puebloans engineered the entire canyon to work for them. On the mesa tops above their cliffside homes, they identified vast expanses of bare sandstone, known as slick rock. These smooth, impermeable surfaces became their primary catchment basins. They would often clear away debris to improve runoff, then construct intricate networks of small stone channels to guide the precious flow. When the rare rain fell, water would sheet across the slick rock, be captured by these channels, and be directed toward the cliff edge. There, they faced another ingenious adaptation, the diversion. Instead of letting the water simply cascade into the void, they built wooden or stone troughs or carved channels in the rock to redirect the flow sideways into waiting reservoirs or directly into the dwelling areas. Down in the canyon bottoms, they completed the system with check dams. These were low walls built across small drainages, not to create deep lakes, but to slow the violent rush of flash floods. By slowing the water, they allowed silt to settle and, crucially, let moisture percolate deep into the soil, recharging the groundwater that fed the very seeps they depended on higher up. They were managing the entire water cycle on a micro scale. This intimate relationship with water dictated everything. The location of a cliff dwelling was not chosen for the view, though it is magnificent, but for the presence of a reliable seep and a strategic position below a good catchment area. The architecture itself was part of the system, with plastered courtyards designed to channel rooftop rainwater into ceramic pots or subsurface cisterns. Every element, from the placement of a single room to the construction of a small dam a mile away, was a calculated move in a centuries-long strategy of survival. The silent, empty dwellings we see today are not ruins of abandonment, but preserved blueprints of a profound hydrological intelligence, a testament to a people who listened to the whisper of water in stone and built their world in answer. The empire's reach was measured not just in miles but in drops of water. Where the Roman legions marched, they brought with them an unshakable rule: civilization follows the aqueduct. This was never more true than at the empire's farthest, most unforgiving edges, the sun-blasted deserts of North Africa and the rocky wastes of the Negev. Here, the Roman military machine faced an adversary more relentless than any opposing army: absolute aridity. To hold these strategic frontiers, they had to perform a logistical miracle, transplanting the lush, water-rich heart of Mediterranean engineering into a landscape that actively repelled it. The solution was a hybrid of sheer imperial will and brilliant local adaptation. They began with the technology they knew best, the iconic arched aqueduct. In places like the frontier city of Caesarea Maritima or the distant outposts along the Limes Arabicus, engineers constructed these monumental channels to bridge dry valleys, bringing water from distant mountain springs across dozens of miles of barren terrain. The aqueduct was a statement in stone, a declaration that Roman order would impose its own geography upon the desert. But the imported blueprint was only the first step. In the Mediterranean, water could often flow year-round. In the desert, its arrival was seasonal and its preservation paramount. This is where Roman pragmatism shone. They looked at the empty landscape and saw not just a problem, but a canvas for colossal storage. At the terminus of these long aqueducts, they constructed vast, sprawling reservoir complexes, some large enough to be mistaken for natural lakes. These were not the hidden cisterns of Petra, but immense, open-faced testaments to volume, lined with waterproof Roman concrete and mortar. The strategic genius was in the timing. During the brief rainy season or the seasonal flow from distant sources, these giant basins would fill to capacity, capturing a water harvest that had to last an entire year. The reservoir became the fortress city's liquid granary. Within the walls of a desert garrison town, this stored water was then managed with meticulous, almost bureaucratic efficiency. It was channeled through a hierarchy of distribution from large central casella or division basins down through lead or ceramic pipes to public fountains, bathhouses, and finally to individual cisterns in homes and barracks. Every citizen and every soldier received a ration according to a carefully calculated schedule. The bathhouse itself, that quintessential symbol of Roman life, was perhaps the ultimate psychological victory over the desert. In the middle of a barren expanse, a legionary could soak in a communal pool, a daily reminder that the empire could not only bring water to the sand, but could afford the luxury of wasting it. This integrated system, the long-distance aqueduct feeding the massive reservoir, supplying the regimented urban grid, enabled something profound. It allowed not just a military garrison to survive, but an entire civilian settlement to flourish around it, with markets, temples, and farms. By mastering the desert's hydrology, Rome turned its most exposed frontiers into stable, productive provinces. The outpost was no longer a lonely sentinel, but a self-sustaining node of imperial power, all because beneath the marching feet of the legions, there flowed another silent army, an endless procession of water obeying Roman command. Yet water's power extends beyond simple storage or transport. In the thin air of the Andean Altiplano, a civilization performed an even more delicate act of hydrological alchemy, using water not just to grow crops, but to rewrite the very climate of their fields. On the windswept plains surrounding Lake Titicaca, the people of Tiwanaku faced a paradox of abundance and hostility. They had a vast freshwater lake, but the land itself was a challenge, waterlogged in the rainy season and subjected to killing frosts nearly 300 nights a year. At an altitude of over 12,000 feet, where most agriculture seems unthinkable, they engineered a landscape that turned these weaknesses into extraordinary strengths. Their invention was the raised field, or suka kalu, but its true genius lay in the canals that surrounded it. They did not merely drain the swamp, they sculpted it into a thermal battery. Workers would excavate long, parallel canals, piling the rich, muddy soil from the bottoms to form wide, elevated planting platforms. These platforms were surrounded on all sides by the water-filled trenches. This simple geometry created a profound microclimate. During the sun-drenched days, the dark water in the canals absorbed solar heat. As the frigid night descended, this stored warmth would slowly radiate upward, enveloping the raised beds in a protective blanket of air several degrees warmer than the surrounding plain. The canals acted as a ring of thermal insulation, pushing the killing frost line down and away from the vulnerable crops. This was frost mitigation engineered with water and geometry. But the system's benefits were manifold. The canals provided constant capillary moisture to the plant roots, eliminating the need for erratic rainfall. The nutrient-rich sediment dredged from the canals each season could be piled onto the beds as a continuous supply of natural fertilizer, creating a self-renewing cycle of fertility. Aquatic plants like totora reeds grew in the canals, which could be used for fodder, roofing, and even the construction of the famous reed boats of the lake. The canals even supported fish, adding protein to the diet. This was not a farm watered by a separate system. It was a fully integrated aquatic ecosystem designed by human hands. The result was an agricultural powerhouse that could support a dense urban population at Tiwanaku, a city that became a major ceremonial and political center for centuries. The raised fields and their companion canals transformed a harsh, marginal environment into a lush, productive landscape. It demonstrated that at its most sophisticated, ancient water management was not about fighting nature, but about understanding its rhythms so deeply that one could compose a new song from them, a song of warmth drawn from cold water and abundance coaxed from the high, thin air. A reliable water source was more than a convenience, it was a form of raw power. In every impossible city, the ability to summon water from a dry rock or command a flood to behave did not just sustain life, it created a profound hierarchy. The very act of building and managing these complex systems demanded a new kind of social order, one that elevated those who controlled the flow to the highest echelons of society. This was the rise of the hydraulic elite, a class of priests, engineers, and rulers whose authority flowed as surely as the water in their aqueducts. Constructing a 50-mile Qanat or a mountain-hugging canal was not a community project that could be completed in a single season. It required decades, sometimes centuries, of coordinated labor, specialized knowledge, and long-term planning. Someone had to survey the route, someone had to organize the teams of diggers and masons, and someone had to allocate the food and tools needed to sustain them. This level of coordination naturally centralized decision-making. The individuals or councils who possessed the secret knowledge of the water tables, the gradients, and the seasonal patterns became indispensable. Their expertise translated directly into political influence, for they held the literal keys to the city's survival. This power extended into the daily life of the city through the allocation of water. Once the system was built, its bounty was not distributed equally. The management of who got water, when, and how much was a powerful tool for social control. In Persian Qanat systems, water shares were meticulously divided by time, often measured with water clocks. A farmer's allotment might be a specific period, say one night every week, during which he could open a gate and channel the flow to his fields. This required a scheduling authority, a record keeper, and an enforcement mechanism. Disputes over water rights were among the most serious conflicts a community could face, and the ability to adjudicate them fairly, or to favor certain groups, cemented the ruler's role as the ultimate guarantor of order and prosperity. The elite did not just manage the water, they sanctified it. By linking the water system to cosmic beliefs and royal identity, they transformed engineering into ideology. The Inca channel at Machu Picchu began at a sacred spring, and its first fountain served the temple of the sun, physically connecting the life-giving flow to the divine power of their emperor. In Angkor, the vast baray were representations of the mythical oceans of Hindu cosmology, and the king who commissioned them was seen as the earthly architect of a divine order. The Roman bathhouse in a desert fortress was not merely for cleanliness. It was a theatrical display of imperial dominance over nature, a place where the luxury of abundant water in a parched land demonstrated Rome's godlike capacity to provide. Even the Great Bath of Mohenjo-Daro suggests a ritual purpose, where control over water purification mirrored spiritual and social purity. These monumental water features were never just practical. They were symbols. A public fountain in a desert city plaza, flowing endlessly, was a constant, audible reminder of the ruler's benevolence and power. It said, "I have conquered the aridity that surrounds you, and I give you this gift of life." The water system became the physical manifestation of a social contract, a silent argument for the legitimacy of the ruling class. To control water was to control time, labor, health, and the very narrative of the community. It was the ultimate source of authority, flowing from a spring deep in the earth, through channels of stone, and into the hands of those who had learned to command the most precious resource in an impossible world. This mastery presents a profound and quiet mystery. These were not societies with textbooks on fluid dynamics or satellites mapping aquifers. They had no concept of germs, of atmospheric pressure, or of the precise chemical composition of hydraulic mortar. Yet they achieved results that leave modern engineers in awe, moving millions of gallons with gradients accurate to within an inch per mile. How was such sophisticated knowledge born in the apparent absence of formal science? The answer lies in a different kind of intelligence, one built from patient, multi-generational conversation with the land. The first and greatest teacher was the environment itself, observed with a depth of attention we can scarcely comprehend today. For people whose survival was directly tied to the behavior of water, every flash flood, every drying spring, every pattern of erosion was a critical data point. They learned by watching where the deer drank after a long drought, noting which cracks in a canyon wall wept moisture long after the rain stopped, and observing how silt settled in a quiet pool. This was not a single lifetime of observation, but a cumulative legacy. A child would learn from a grandparent where the old water trail used to run before a landslide changed it. Knowledge of the aquifer's seasonal pulse, of the mountain's hidden seep lines, was passed down as sacred folklore, a map of survival woven into stories and songs. This long-term environmental memory allowed for a powerful, iterative process of trial and error, but on a scale of centuries, not years. A community might extend a canal a little further each generation, carefully noting where it silted up or where the flow diminished. A collapsed tunnel was not just a failure, it was a lesson in geology, teaching about rock density and groundwater pressure. They developed an intuitive, practical physics, understanding through hands-on experience that water seeks its own level, that a sealed plaster lining could hold it, and that a wider channel slows a torrent. This embodied knowledge was likely guarded and refined by specialized groups. It is easy to imagine the existence of water guilds or families of muqannis in Persia, or of Inca engineers who were both diviners and surveyors, perhaps a priestly class who blended celestial observation with spring mapping. Their expertise would have been a closely held secret, a source of both status and solemn responsibility. They were the keepers of the gradient, the rememberers of the aquifer. The contrast is what fascinates us between their intuitive, experience-based methods and the breathtaking precision of their outcomes. They did not calculate tensile strength, but they built aqueducts that have withstood earthquakes for 2,000 years. They had no microscopes, but they created plaster so advanced it still seals cisterns today. This suggests that their knowledge system, while not scientific in our modern, experimental sense, was profoundly empirical and ruthlessly effective. It was a science of place honed by absolute necessity, where a mistake meant not a failed grade but a dying city. Their legacy is a testament to the power of human attention, proving that deep understanding can be built one careful observation, one corrected error, and one passed down story at a time. A flowing aqueduct is a silent promise, but it is a promise that must be renewed every single day. The true wonder of these impossible cities was not just in their construction, but in their relentless, quiet upkeep. For every mile of stone channel, there was a mile that needed to be swept clear of wind-blown sand and fallen leaves. For every vast underground cistern, there was the back-breaking, seasonal work of dredging out accumulated silt to preserve its precious volume. A single crack in the plaster lining of a reservoir could mean the loss of thousands of gallons, a disaster requiring immediate repair. This was the unseen labor, the endless rhythm of maintenance that turned a brilliant engineering feat into a living, breathing system. Sustainability was not a one-time achievement. It was a daily practice performed by an army of anonymous caretakers. In the Qanats of Persia, teams of muqannis would descend the vertical shafts with lamps and tools, moving through the dark, cramped tunnels to clear blockages and reinforce walls, ensuring the hidden river never stopped its silent flow. At Machu Picchu, keepers would walk the length of the stone-covered channel, removing debris that could divert or contaminate the sacred water before it reached the stairway of fountains. This work required more than just strong backs. It demanded specialized knowledge passed from one generation to the next, an intimate familiarity with every twist and potential weakness in the system. But who organized this labor? Who decided which farmer's field would go without water for a week so a canal could be repaired? The answer reveals that these hydrological marvels were, fundamentally, social contracts carved in stone. The management of water rights became the foundation of civic order. A community needed a shared agreement, a set of rules, and a trusted authority to enforce them. Disputes over water allocation could shatter a society, so elaborate systems of time sharing were developed, often monitored by community-appointed water stewards using calibrated water clocks. This created a framework of mutual obligation. The farmer who benefited from the irrigation channel understood that his son might be called to help maintain it. The family drawing water from a public fountain accepted their turn and their responsibility to keep it clean. The magnificent aqueduct then was merely the skeleton. The flesh and blood of the system was the collective human agreement to care for it, to share its bounty fairly, and to teach the next generation how to do the same. The city did not persist because the stone held, but because the people decided day after day, year after year, that it must. The stone channel descends with a slope so gentle you cannot see it with your eye, yet it guided water for miles without ever pooling or rushing. This is the quiet miracle of ancient engineering, achieving a precision that seems to demand modern instruments, using nothing but simple tools and profound observation. The evidence is etched into the landscape itself. Archaeologists have measured Inca canals in the Andes with gradients that drop less than 1% over their entire length, a feat of leveling that maintained a perfect, steady flow across treacherous mountain slopes. At Petra, the master channel carved into the walls of the Siq maintains its consistent decline for nearly a mile, ensuring that floodwaters were tamed into a manageable stream. How was this possible without laser levels or theodolites? The answer lies in a beautiful application of fundamental physics. The most reliable level in the ancient world was the surface of still water. Engineers likely used long, water-filled trenches as giant spirit levels. By sighting along the calm surface, teams could establish a true horizontal line across any distance. They would then work in careful increments, marking a drop of a few finger widths for every 100 paces, transferring that benchmark forward in a slow, patient relay until the entire route was mapped. Another method involved the corobate, a wooden frame with a central water channel, or simple frames with plumb lines, which could be used to find level ground step by step. The consistency of the gradient was not an accident of rough construction. It was the deliberate outcome of a meticulous, repeatable process refined over generations. This same dedication to precision is found in the seals that held the water captive, in the underground cisterns of Cappadocia or the reservoirs of the Negev. Plaster recipes were perfected into a kind of ancient super glue. Mixing lime with volcanic ash, crushed pottery, or animal hair created hydraulic mortar, a substance that could actually set and cure underwater, forming a seamless, impermeable barrier. The stonework itself became watertight through selection and craftsmanship. The Inca are famed for their polygonal masonry, where irregular stones were painstakingly shaped to fit together without mortar, their interfaces so tight that not even a blade could slip between them. This was not merely an artistic choice, it was a hydrological one, preventing leakage in critical canals and fountain foundations. Each of these techniques speaks to a different kind of knowledge, one built from tactile experience and relentless refinement. They understood that a water drop always finds the lowest point, so they crafted a path for it with unwavering consistency. They knew that pressure seeks every crack, so they invented seals that defied it. The real instrument was not a tool of metal, but the accumulated wisdom of countless observers, the human eye trained by necessity, and the unwavering patience to get it right, because the life of a city depended on a slope no one could even see. The water's journey, so carefully engineered, was never guaranteed to be eternal. For all their brilliance, these hydrological masterpieces were exquisitely fragile, balanced on a knife's edge of constant care and environmental stability. When the balance tipped, the very systems that created the impossible city could become the instrument of its undoing. The causes of collapse were often as interconnected as the canals themselves, a cascade of failures where one broken link could unravel the entire chain. A single, powerful earthquake could fracture a critical aqueduct or collapse the lining of a vital cistern, severing the city's lifeline in an instant. More insidious was the slow, silent threat of silt. Every canal and reservoir, no matter how well designed, gradually filled with sediment carried by the water it conveyed. If the relentless, back-breaking work of dredging was neglected, the channel would choke, the reservoir's capacity would shrink, and the flow would slow to a trickle. This maintenance was a social compact, and when that compact broke down due to conflict, political instability, or the sheer strain of supporting a growing population, the system began to fail from within. Perhaps the most formidable adversary was a prolonged shift in the climate itself, a mega-drought that could last for decades. A system engineered for a certain range of rainfall might simply have no answer for a new, drier normal, where springs dried up permanently and the seasonal rains never returned to recharge the aquifers. We see this pattern etched into the archaeological record of the ancestral pueblones, often called the Anasazi, in the American Southwest. Their intricate networks of check dams and mesa-top catchments were marvels of adaptation, but they were calibrated to a specific hydrological rhythm. When that rhythm changed during the Great Drought of the 1200s, the systems could not compensate. Springs vanished, agricultural yields plummeted, and the social tensions over dwindling resources likely intensified. The magnificent cliff dwellings, like those at Mesa Verde, were not abandoned in haste, but in a slow, painful retreat from a landscape that could no longer sustain urban life. Similarly, in the lush lowlands of the Maya, scholars point to a combination of factors that overwhelmed their water management. Their reservoirs and canal systems supported immense populations, but they also required intensive management. Periods of prolonged drought would have drastically lowered water tables and evaporated stored supplies. At the same time, deforestation for agriculture and urban expansion may have increased erosion, speeding the siltation of those critical reservoirs. The result was a mounting pressure on the social and political order. If the king, as the divine guarantor of rain and water, could no longer deliver, his authority crumbled alongside the failing infrastructure. The abandonment of the great ceremonial centers was not necessarily a sudden catastrophe, but often the culmination of a long decline, a gradual unraveling as the water that built the city slowly, irrevocably, went away. These stories are not of ignorance but of profound vulnerability. They remind us that the most ingenious human systems are in a constant dialogue with an environment that is never truly still. The stone endures, but the flow is fragile. For centuries, the true purpose of these stone channels and empty basins remained a silent mystery. When the first archaeologists arrived at sites like Petra or Machu Picchu, they saw the grand facades and temples, but the water systems were often misinterpreted. A perfectly straight stone channel running across a desert plain was catalogued as a ceremonial road or a boundary marker. An intricate network of small canals in the Andes was thought to be part of a ritual layout, not a practical irrigation grid. The water was gone, and with it, the understanding of the city's most vital organ. The modern rediscovery of these systems has been a slow, patient process of relearning the language of ancient hydrology, a puzzle where each clue was a stone out of place. It often began with a simple, nagging question. Why would a road be carved with such a precise, imperceptible slope? Why would a ceremonial feature lead directly to a sealed, plaster-lined chamber in the bedrock? The turning point came when researchers stopped looking at these features in isolation and began to see them as parts of a connected system. They started to follow the lines. In the Iranian desert, the breakthrough in understanding the Qanat came from tracing the line of mysterious, crater-like shafts backwards from a lush field. By physically following this dotted line across miles of barren land, they eventually discovered the mother well at the foot of a mountain, connecting the agricultural output to the hidden water source in a single, logical chain. It was a revelation, the desert's secret finally mapped. At Machu Picchu, engineers tested the stone fountains by simulating the original water source. When they carefully reintroduced water into the main channel, the 16 fountains came to life in sequence, each basin filling and spilling into the next in a graceful, functional cascade. This proved it was not a symbolic stairway, but a sophisticated public water distribution network, a working utility of stunning elegance. These moments of understanding are triumphs of interdisciplinary thinking, where the archaeologist's trowel meets the hydrologist's flow meter. Laser scanning and ground-penetrating radar now reveal the full extent of subterranean cisterns and blocked tunnels, showing the staggering scale of what was built. Computer models can simulate ancient rainfall and flash flood patterns, demonstrating how a city's layout was a direct response to hydrological forces. Each discovery peels back another layer of assumption, revealing the practical genius beneath the monument. We are not just finding lost cities, we are recovering their lost logic, solving an engineering puzzle where the answer was always written in the flow of water itself. The ingenuity of the past holds a mirror to the challenges of our present. Today, vast regions of the world face a familiar, tightening grip of water scarcity, a crisis that echoes the very pressures those ancient engineers sought to overcome. Our modern solutions often rely on immense energy to pump water across continents or to desalinate oceans, creating systems that are powerful, yet sometimes brittle and centralized. In this context, the principles that sustained impossible cities offer not just historical curiosity, but a profound and practical wisdom for a thirsty planet. The first lesson is in the elegance of gravity. Ancient systems moved water with the quiet, relentless pull of the earth itself, requiring no external power once established. Modern planners are revisiting this logic, designing neighborhoods and agricultural zones where gravity-assisted distribution reduces the staggering energy costs of pumping, creating more resilient networks less vulnerable to power failures. The second lesson is the sanctity of local storage. From the rock-cut cisterns of Petra to the raised fields of Tiwanaku, these cultures understood that security lay in capturing and holding water within their own controlled environment. For our era of stressed rivers and depleted aquifers, this underscores the critical importance of decentralized rainwater harvesting, of recharging groundwater, and of treating every rooftop and park as a potential catchment area to build local reserves. Perhaps the most vital lesson is the concept of the integrated watershed, seeing a city not as separate from its environment, but as a single, managed hydrological unit. The Khmer at Angkor did not just build temples, they engineered an entire landscape to store monsoon floods for dry season release. Modern cities, often sealed under concrete, create dangerous runoff and waste a precious resource. Green infrastructure such as permeable pavements, urban wetlands, and restored floodplains applies this ancient logic, slowing water down, letting it sink into the ground, and cleaning it naturally, turning a problem into a portfolio. We even see direct revivals of ancient techniques. In the arid coasts of Chile and Peru, communities erect modern fog nets, synthetic versions of the old reed fences, harvesting drinking water from the mist. Inspired by the Qanats' gentle underground flow, some contemporary projects use solar canals, covering water channels with solar panels to generate power while drastically reducing evaporation. The ancient concern for water purity finds its parallel in cutting-edge, nature-based wastewater recycling that mimics the filtering function of wetlands. This historical knowledge is not a blueprint to copy, but a philosophy to reclaim. It teaches us to work with the landscape, not against it, to value simplicity and passive design, and to build systems that are maintainable by the communities they serve. In an age of climate uncertainty, the most advanced solution may be to remember how to listen to the water and to guide it with the patience and foresight of those who first built life where it seemed impossible. The final stone channel has been mapped, but the story is far from over. For every answer revealed by archaeology, a dozen new questions rise to the surface, reminding us that our understanding of these ancient systems is still a work in progress, a puzzle with many pieces yet to be found. We can trace the main aqueduct into a city, but what about the countless smaller capillaries that branched off to feed individual homes, workshops, or gardens? Those fragile, often organic channels have vanished, leaving us to guess at the full, intimate reach of the water network. At Angkor, the scale of the known canal system is already staggering, but researchers now suspect it was even more vast and interconnected. How far did these waterways truly extend into the surrounding countryside? Were there secondary, seasonal reservoirs we have not yet located? The landscape itself holds these secrets, waiting for the right key. Some mysteries are questions of sheer technique. We can stand in the sick at Petra and admire the carved channel that tamed the flash floods, but a profound practical question remains. How did the Nabatean engineers conduct the initial life or death survey for that diversion tunnel? Without modern instruments pinpointing the exact angle and elevation to safely shunt a catastrophic torrent away from the city center would have required astonishing precision. A single miscalculation could have doomed the entire project. Did they use a series of water-filled trenches over the rugged terrain? Did they wait for a small rain event to observe the natural flow and mark its path? The method is lost to us, a silent testament to a skill so refined it left no manual behind. This is where the past meets the future of discovery. New technologies are acting as a kind of digital divining rod, allowing us to see through soil and forest canopy to the hydrological bones of ancient landscapes. LiDAR, which uses laser pulses from aircraft, has revolutionized our view of places like the jungles around Angkor and the mountains of the Andes. By stripping away the dense vegetation, LiDAR reveals the ghostly imprint of human engineering on the Earth, uncovering canals, field systems, and road networks on a scale previously unimaginable. It shows us that what we thought was wilderness was often a carefully managed waterscape. Similarly, ground-penetrating radar sends pulses into the earth, mapping subsurface structures without ever lifting a shovel. It can locate the outline of a buried cistern, trace the path of a filled-in Qanat tunnel, or find the foundation of a long-vanished sluice gate. Each scan is like developing a photograph of a hidden world. These tools suggest a thrilling possibility that for every celebrated water system we have studied, there may be others still completely unknown, lying dormant beneath deserts, fields, or modern cities. What undiscovered reservoirs might be sealed under the sands of Egypt? What forgotten mountain aqueducts are slowly crumbling beneath forest roots in Central Asia? Every new discovery does more than add to a map. It refines our understanding of the ancient mind. It shows us the priorities, the adaptive brilliance, and the sheer will of people who refuse to be defined by the limits of their environment. The search continues not just for lost channels, but for the complete story of how humanity learned to converse with water, a conversation whose earliest whispers we are only now beginning to fully hear. The romantic ruin we walk through today is a beautiful illusion. It is the hollow shell of a once thriving machine. Those silent stone facades in the desert, those empty fountains on the mountain, were not built to be admired as ruins. They were built to be alive, to hum with the sound of flowing water, to be the bustling heart of a hydrological system that defied the map. This reframes our entire premise. Petra, Machu Picchu, Angkor, these places were never truly impossible. The geography itself was just a set of conditions, a challenging equation written in rock and climate. The real impossibility was not the location, but the monumental act of human will required to solve that equation. It was the societal commitment to spend generations carving a hidden river through a mountain. It was the technical courage to believe you could redirect a flash flood or store a monsoon for a year. The impossibility was in the doing. When we see a cliff dwelling, we marvel at its precarious beauty. But the ancestral Puebloan engineer saw a strategic position below a sandstone seep and within reach of a mesa top catchment. That dwelling was a calculated node in a water network. The awe-inspiring temple at the end of a desert canyon was, in its time, also the terminus of an aqueduct, a place where the triumph of controlled water was celebrated in stone and ritual. We must learn to see with double vision, to perceive both the serene monument and the dynamic, functioning system it once anchored. These cities were not passive settlements placed in a hostile world. They were active creations of entirely new environments. They were ecosystems engineered by human hands where water was directed, stored, and released according to a meticulous plan. The green oasis in the desert, the fertile terraces on a sheer slope, these were not lucky accidents. They were manufactured landscapes, proof that these cultures did not just adapt to their world, they rewrote its rules. Therefore, the ultimate mystery is not how they survived in an impossible place, but how they summoned the collective vision to transform that place altogether. It asks us to look beyond the silent stones to the roar of the managed waterfall that once filled them, to hear not the wind in an empty canyon, but the constant, gentle trickle in a stone channel. The true wonder lies in that moment of decision, when a society looked at a barren cliff or a seasonal swamp and said, "Here we will build our future, and we will bring the water with us." That act of audacious imagination is the real artifact, more enduring than any temple, because its legacy is the enduring proof that our greatest limitations are often not in the world around us, but in our failure to see the possible hidden within the seemingly impossible. That silent, flowing water was the truest monument. The soaring temples and carved facades were the public declaration, but the lifeblood of every impossible city was the quiet, relentless achievement of its water system. These were not settlements that happened to survive in difficult places. They were civilizations that chose to make a statement there, a declaration of absolute hydrological control. Their survival was not a geographical accident, but a continuous engineering triumph, renewed every day by the sweep of a channel and the dredging of a cistern. The story of Petra or Machu Picchu is not about finding water, but about commanding it, about bending the most fundamental force of nature to a human timetable and a human vision. This reveals an enduring truth about our species. Our relationship with water is the deepest dialogue we have with our planet. It is the conversation that determines where we live, how we live, and whether we thrive. For those ancient builders, water was not just a resource, it was the ultimate medium for expressing power, faith, and communal ingenuity. They wrote their boldest ideas not only in stone, but in the directed flow of a spring and the captured stillness of a reservoir. Today, we live in cities that seem to defy different kinds of logic, concrete landscapes where water appears magically from taps and vanishes silently down drains. But the lesson from the desert and the mountaintop is that no civilization is ever free from the water equation. Our own modern worlds are sustained by hidden infrastructures of staggering complexity, by pipes and pumps, treatment plants and aqueducts that are the direct descendants of those ancient channels. The next time you turn on a faucet, consider the invisible journey that water makes to reach you. Think of the gradients calculated, the tunnels dug, and the social agreements upheld, not so different in spirit from the work of a Nabatean engineer or an Inca stone mason. The impossible city reminds us that our greatest achievements are always, fundamentally, a pact with water. It is a pact that requires respect, maintenance, and a profound understanding that the flow which builds a world can also quietly take it away.